Welcome back to another special edition of the CeltsAreHere podcast. We've already brought you one with already a January signing in Yuki Kobayashi. This time we're heading across the pond. We're over in Canada and we're wanting to talk about Alistair Johnston. We're joined by Peter Galindo, who isn't in Canada just now. He's out there in Qatar covering the World Cup. Not the best of starts so far, Peter, but maybe hopeful for match day 3 to get a result.
I would think so, yeah, just to get a little bit of pride in the end, because as well as that first game went, you come away empty-handed, then you get handed a lot of lessons against Croatia, so let's hope that they maybe learn from that as quickly as Thursday and they finish on a bit of a high here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, right away into the kind of Canadian national team chat, whenever these rumours about Alistair Johnston started, it was around a match day 1, and Celtic fans tuned in to see, who is this guy? And a lot of the qualities I think people saw in the Canadian national team were something they'd saw in Celtic this season so far in the Champions League. It was a team who, were aggressive in their press. They wanted to go at teams, but they didn't take their chances. They were eventually punished. And just in terms of Alistair Johnston's position in this Canadian national team, he's 24. I think he's made around 30 caps now. What has his international career been like so far? Because many people won't be used to Canada at all at the World Cup.
For sure, and Johnston's one of those players who I think mirrors the rise of the national team, and that's really up until 2021. He was uncapped, a relative unknown, playing for Nashville and MLS, but he was drafted out of college, and just that whole North American system, you tend to kind of feast or famine in that situation, right? Because some draft picks pan out, some don't. But Johnston, to his credit, in 2020, in a pandemic-affected season, showed a really strong defensive acuity in his first season with Nashville. So it made everybody think, this could be a possible option at right back for the national team if he keeps progressing this way. Made more progress in 2021, makes his Canada debut, looks really good at right back as a more defensive-minded option for Richie Larea. And then seemingly overnight, pretty much as soon as he debuted for Canada, he slowly but surely started to progress as a player in the final third. He was starting to take more chances getting forward. His vision was impeccable. And this is what's so interesting, is that he does play as a right back now, or a right wing back now for Canada and for CF Montreal, who he eventually got transferred to. But he started to establish himself as a right-sided center back, and he had never played center back before in his career for Canada. And in college, he played a lot as a number 6. So then that led to him kind of moving into the right back position, which we often see a lot of number 6s ultimately do. So the thought was, if we put him on the right side of this back 3, where he has experience as a 6, he clearly has the vision of a midfielder, so he can hit those really quick outlets, he can defend very well, he never really loses one-on-one duels. This could actually work out. And then as he got to Montreal, as he kept playing for the national team, and as his crossing improved, as his defending improved, they started to utilize all of those qualities. So he's very much the epitome of just a complete two-way fullback, and one who is going to be aggressive in his pressing, who can play those quick combos, who picks his spots, when to go forward, when to stay back. He's almost in a lot of ways the perfect right back for an Ange Postecoglou side.
Yeah, well, I want to get on his positional flexibility very shortly, because that's been something that when Ange Postecoglou arrived at Celtic, many people just weren't familiar with this idea of an inverted fullback. It's been something that Pep Guardiola has obviously kind of mastered during his time at Manchester City. When you see the role of a fullback take on a completely different challenge, they're not just bombing up and down both flanks, but we see them come centrally to receive the ball and be another addition to the attack. So in terms of everything you've said there about his qualities, it seems as if he's going to suit that. But just to kind of go back to one of your points there about, the university system, Celtic, from memory, went back to this with Andrew Gutman and Manny Perez, 2 players I don't know if you'll remember or know their names or be familiar with. And, you called it feast or famine. Both those guys came across to Celtic, didn't make any senior competitive appearances, and I think one's maybe playing for Atlanta United over there in MLS just now. I think that might be Gutman. Not too sure about Manny Perez, but for Celtic fans just now, if anybody's kind of been following this journey of Ange Postecoglou, one of his main traits has been looking at markets maybe where European football just haven't touched. And it was interesting looking at the top 5 leagues in Europe recently, Peter, and noticing that out with the top 5 leagues, it was MLS that were sending the most amount of players to this World Cup, which is quite incredible. And I think from a Celtic fan's perspective, we're happy that this business has been done and we've got in there before we've maybe got what we would call the World Cup tax, as in player performs well at the World Cup, more money will get added onto them. It seems as if we've already snuffed out Alistair Johnston's qualities in this, but we've got a player just now in midfield, Ryo Hatate. He's missed out in the Japan team, didn't go to the World Cup under Hajime Moriyasu, but much like Alistair Johnston, he's only been playing really professional football for 2 years, and everything that's kind of been, said about him in terms of midfielder, there's still, I think, a lot of development to go in here, and he kind of suits this bill, Alistair Johnston, like Ryo Hatate, where he's a player who's probably still got a lot of development to go, even though he's 24, and you would consider him, maybe at the point where he's going to go into his peak in a few years' time. But, for Johnston, Ryo Hatate at 24 coming through what is a fairly similar university system, it's not exactly the same. That there's still probably a lot of potential to go with Alistair Johnston, isn't there? Just due to the amount of actual professional game time he's had.
For sure there is. And that's what's so peculiar about the university system, is that you can have a 21, 22-year-old player who, in the European system or in the South American system, basically anywhere outside North America, they would be considered like on the brink of hitting their prime almost. But in the case of Johnston and Hatate, as you point out there, they're still kind of in those lean years where they're still learning their craft in a way, especially, in the case of Hatate. I mean, he jumps up a completely different level going to Celtic, playing in the Champions League, having the pressure that a big club brings. And I think for Johnston, he's someone who's, I think like Hatate so far at least, is going to thrive in that environment, because Johnston is a player who, he comes across very, soft-spoken, very, very humble, very, he's an open book. There's nothing he won't talk about. And one of the things that he always discussed right as he was making his Canada debut and starting to rack up the caps was, he very much knew his limitations, but was willing to learn and adapt and become a more complete player. And we've seen that over the last year really pan out, because if you would ask me a year ago, is Johnston going to become someone who was one of the most influential fullbacks in terms of attacking fullbacks in MLS, I would have said definitely not. And he ended up becoming that. Do I think that he was going to become such a key piece for the national team? No, I didn't. And yet I think there was actually a streak there where he actually had the most consecutive starts in national team history. That's how important he became to the team. And I do think that over the next year or two, you could probably start to see him become even more confident in the final third. And I think as well, the one real weakness he has still, and he's gotten a little bit better as he's gotten more games, it's reading those aerial duels. Sometimes, especially when he's trying to defend the back post or what have you, he tends to get a little lost, maybe not realize where his man is, maybe caught ball watching sometimes. Those are some areas where he could probably still improve at. And, playing on this World Cup stage is probably going to help him realize, listen, you can't get the little details wrong. And certainly playing for a club like Celtic, he's going to realize, look, any little mistake, it's going to be fixated on. I can't let this happen. So he's probably going to work on that as much as he possibly can.
Yeah, I think last night there was some people, Celtic fans can be very cynical at times, like all football supporters can be. He was up against Ivan Perisic last night, who we know his qualities, how good a player he is in the Premier League currently with Spurs. And as you say there, those minute details will be zoomed in upon just because of the stage he's at. In terms of Scottish football, your week-to-week teams won't be anywhere near that quality that he's maybe up against, in a World Cup, or, Celtic fans always want to be in the Champions League. And that's why, in such a short space of time, when you play those 6 games in Champions League, the minute details and the big moments are, zoomed in upon and really thoroughly checked. So that's a part of his game, as you say. He probably could improve it. It's something, I always bang on to people about that. There's a reason why some of these players maybe make that step to Celtic first before going elsewhere. If they're maybe looking for that, maybe what you would call bigger move in Europe, just in terms of level that they're maybe playing at. Celtic's a massive club, but some see other European leagues, whether it be England or elsewhere, is where they want to be at. So it's probably something he can develop in his game, but that'll be something that Ange Postecoglou's probably noticed and thinks, yeah, I can certainly try and improve that. Back to his positional flexibility earlier, you've spoken about him playing in a number of roles, the 6, the right side of a centre-half, kind of free in there, and at right wing-back. Been playing right centre-back for Canada at this point in time, but he's also been playing kind of right wing-back for Montreal. Where do you think so far, Peter, has been his base position from what you've seen?
That is a great question, because I do think that he has performed admirably in both positions, but still has a lot to work on in either position. So in terms of as a center back, what I love about Johnston is, yes, he's a great defender, one-on-one. And even against Croatia last night, he was done no favors by Tajon Buchanan, by Atiba Hutchinson for the lack of cover. I thought, considering that, he did cope pretty well. That aside, I love how much vision he has, just the outlet passes he hits, the killer through balls that he randomly is capable of, which I never thought he would have been, but on the regular he's hitting those. And that is a definite weapon to have, because if you want Johnston to maybe be a little more conservative defensively, he is still capable of being able to help you play through high presses, build from deep and whatnot. So that's certainly the positives. The negatives are the aerial duels, because as a center back, you're going to have to be engaged in those a lot. And maybe at times, I guess a lack of acceleration possibly lets him down. But as a fullback, maybe not so much of an issue if you can at least, I guess, get that right amount of separation. In terms of at the fullback position, going forward, he probably still has a little bit to improve on. There are times when he probably could engage in more one-on-one duels, maybe run towards the byline a bit more instead of just crossing it into the box. As good of a crosser as he is, that might be the next step in his evolution as an attacking fullback, is just being able to take on those defenders and taking those chances, because he doesn't really like to dribble too much in the final third. But I think if he moves to a club like Celtic, who really wants their fullbacks to get forward a lot, he's going to have to adapt to that.
In terms of, what I said earlier about the way Celtic play, that inverted fullback style, it is likely that Alistair Johnston is going to come in to play right back in recent weeks. That there have been swirling rumours about his counterpart last night in Josip Juranovic and a potential move away from the club. Whether there is anything to that, we don't know. I think everybody's just kind of putting the pieces of this jigsaw together, and that Jeff Johnston's going to come in. He's likely going to be Josip's replacement, but there's nothing definite about that. In terms of that role, though, as an inverted fullback, is that something that you could see Alistair Johnston definitely excelling at Celtic, just due to having played, that awareness of playing in the middle, to the right side of a back three, and in the wing-back position, and you've mentioned that he's played in the 6, just that positional flexibility and awareness, is that something that you think those traits have shown that he can just slot into a Celtic-style inverted full-back perfectly?
I think he can. He's done it at times for Canada, to be fair to him. There are times when, say, for example, one of the midfielders for Canada will drop into that back three over Johnston, and then Johnston will sort of tuck inside, or he'll maybe switch flanks sometimes depending on the situation. And just because of his experience playing centrally, whether it's as a midfielder or as a center back, you can see that there's a comfort level there. And he is actually quite calm under pressure, which is surprising for someone who maybe isn't the best, or I guess the most willing dribbler. And that to me is crucial, because just when you think, oh, Johnston's in trouble here, he's maybe holding onto the ball a little bit too long, he calmly and deftly just picks out a player next to him, makes a run forward or makes the run back to receive again, and then just gets out of pressure that way. So that could be really crucial, especially when Celtic builds from the back and are trying to evade high presses, probably mostly in the Champions League or in those Old Firm games against Rangers if they want to press from the front. But certainly that's a role that he would be more than comfortable fulfilling, I think.
Yeah, there's someone in Cameron Carter-Vickers who obviously represents the US national team at the back, and he's probably that presence in there just now who has really got that ability just to calm everything down. And when he's on the ball, as a football fan, I think it's natural that if you're passing the ball about the back and you're up against a high press, you're going to feel a bit nervous. But Cam always seems to be calm at the back, and that's something. If Alistair Johnston can come in and do that, I think everybody will be happy with it. But just kind of touching on his stats here too, Peter, and that 3-4-3 formation that he plays kind of for CF Montreal last season in 2,648 minutes of game time, he contributed 4 goals, 5 assists, with 23 total key passes, which are defined in MLS stats as passes that result in attacking positions. That just seems to really fit the bill for this Celtic team, and hopefully he'll be thinking to himself that he can add to those goals and assists if he does come to Glasgow, because certainly domestically you're going to get a lot of chances, you're going to have a lot of the ball, you won't be under the cosh a lot of the time, and with the way Ange Postecoglou wants to play, his mantra is we never stop, and hopefully, with those kind of stats, Johnston will be looking to build on them.
Yeah, and Johnston loves to run as well. He just doesn't stop running. It's almost like he has 3 lungs out there, which again, Postecoglou is going to love, just because, I do believe in MLS this season, he was among the leaders in among his positional peers, in terms of pressures per 90. So again, that's perfect for a Celtic side that wants to press from the front, that wants to play aggressively, that also needs to constantly be running, right? And in terms of the goals and the assists, that's another underrated trait that Johnston has. It's that ability to read the situation, see that there's the probability to maybe make a late run, shadow into the box, and then have a shot. And also his shooting from distance is also decently underrated as well. He actually scored a couple of goals from pretty long distances this past season, so that certainly helps him. And again, the crossing, like just the accuracy of the crossing is off the charts. Like I said earlier, if he can start to take on defenders one-on-one, if he can maybe get to the byline, hit some cutbacks, which he is capable of doing, that's just going to add even more to just being involved in that final ball and in those goals.
In terms of, just about what he's came up against, something, anybody have asked with the players that Celtic have signed from the J League is how they would come in and adapt. Yuki Kobayashi is the latest one to be an arrival from Japan. He's the 5th player to arrive from the J League in 18 months' time. Just in terms of what Johnston's came up against internationally and in the MLS, do you think that's something that is good to prepare you for Scotland? Obviously, Scottish football, very demanding, very physical at times, and then into the Champions League, we've already spoken about, the high level of opposition and whatnot you've been against. Where do you think the best tests have probably came from Johnston, both at club football and internationally so far?
I would certainly say internationally it has been in those marquee games against the US, Mexico, obviously at the World Cup now. Those have really been the barometer in terms of can he handle it at this level? Because it's one thing to do it in MLS, where I feel like at times you maybe get an extra second or two on the ball that you wouldn't otherwise get at a higher level. That would be the one criticism I have of the league, because you've seen certain MLS players in matches against Japan or Uruguay or even at the World Cup. They're overawed by the fact that, I have no time on the ball. I need to make a decision even before I get this ball. I need to read the situation even before I receive a pass. And Johnston, I think at first was at times struggling with that when he first made his international debut, but then very quickly, I think it was the Gold Cup last year, that was when I think he really started to get, okay, I need to be incisive. I need to be sharp. I need to be constantly alert of my surroundings. And that has really helped him. At the club level, I think that the biggest challenges for him that he's overcome, I think, are just proving that he's more than a defensive fullback. And at Montreal this season, I think he proved that. It took him a little bit of time to settle in there because I think the coach, Wilfred Nancy, was trying to figure out, do I use him as a center back? Do I use him as a wing back? How could I really utilize all of his qualities? And then he eventually settled on this hybrid center back, fullback role where at times he would maybe tuck into that defense and off the ball, they would set up in a back four. Johnston would be the right back, sometimes the center back, depending on the situation. And then in possession, when we switch to a 3, he gets forward and you just utilize his crossing ability. So I think it's just getting that tactical flexibility down, getting comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, and his attributes in terms of stats are looking as if he's a comfortable player. 54% of his successful passes coming as forward zone passes. That links to what you're saying about him liking to excel when he gets to play in that wing back position. And then his defensive qualities, 92.3% of short passes from the back, which is something, again, breeds in well to what we're talking about with Ange Postecoglou, and his crossing stats as well look quite good. We'll get that up and probably an article on the site, but it just seems to fit well. And something, actually about experience so far at international level, something around J-League players and other players arriving in at Celtic, even a guy like Sabanovic who came from Russia, was their experience maybe against that step up in opposition. A lot of these guys who had arrived had played at top level for their teams domestically, but maybe when it came to that international point, they maybe hadn't featured too often. Haksabanovic was Montenegro international in terms of his similarities to Johnston, a lot of caps for his country and whatnot. For some guys like Rio Hitati, who I spoke about there, and others who maybe haven't featured against opposition, like we've spoken about, guys like Pulisic and Carrasco, who Johnston's been coming up against. I think that's a good grounding for coming in here, and something maybe there's been a lot around Celtic's chat in Champions League was that inexperience of players just not playing at that level, not coming up against that quality of opposition. Whereas in these 30 caps and having played at a World Cup, it just seems that Johnston's maybe got that wee bit more in his portfolio just now than maybe some of the others that have arrived at Celtic over the past 18 months, just with having this tournament, just before that possible imminent arrival.
Yeah, and that's certainly going to help him because that'll give him a small taste, even just in the Champions League, of what this level is going to be like. And the fact that he's also playing in a national team with Alphonso Davies, with Stefan Eustáquio, Tejan Buchanan, who are playing in the Champions League themselves and for some very big clubs, I think that's going to rub off on him positively. Because he sees what those guys are like, and you can see the way that he speaks about all of them, that he really admires how they handle themselves on those big stages. He was talking the other day about how Davies he has to remind himself that he's still very young. He's 2 years younger than Johnston, and yet the way that he responds to adversity or the way that he responds to certain challenges and just being Alphonso Davies and being the superstar for Canada, it really astounds him how well he handles himself. And I think he uses that to his advantage, Johnston, in that he sees what it takes to be a top player. He applies that to himself mentally, and it seems like he thrives using that mentality.
Yeah, he's certainly an elite player, Alphonso Davies. I quite like to watch Bundesliga, and he's always a kind of top performer when you watch Bayern Munich. So yeah, absolutely, it's good having that superstar player, if you will, in your international side, because surely that can only help in terms of his game. Just in terms of, you talk about adversity there, I see that he played a bit of hockey when he was younger. That should probably prepare him for Scottish football, which is going to be tough tackling, but he's not going to be shy about doing that, is he?
No, that's very true. He did play ice hockey growing up, and actually his brother as well, who's a footballer. He is supposedly better than Johnston was, and he's in the college system, and he might actually end up getting drafted into MLS this year. And he played hockey too, and he actually came on to my podcast, the Northern Football Podcast, and discussed how, the fast pace of play of hockey and the physicality of hockey also really helped him with football, because obviously when you're playing at a fast pace, when you're playing at a frenetic pace, and again, much like in ice hockey, you have very little time to think sometimes on the pitch. So that really helped him. And certainly physically, it's probably toughened him up in a lot of ways too, because there aren't a lot of times when he's going shoulder for shoulder, stride for stride with a player, when he often loses out physically in a duel.
And that's something in his game that I think, you know, there's been a joy about Ange Postecoglou's Celtic to watch, and Alistair Johnston probably fits that profile of a player with self-belief, not too cocky, but will come in and thrive and will enjoy his football. And you'll see that when you probably watch him in the park, just due to his approach to games. He wants to commit in games. He wants to play for the team, which are attributes that I think every Celtic fans are delighted that that's what's coming into the club.
Yeah, and honestly, if anybody gets a chance to speak to him or just interacts with him, he is one of the friendliest, open guys you will ever meet. I think Celtic fans will love him just for that alone, because he knows, like, there are so many times when we speak to him and we're given 15 minutes, 20 minutes or what have you, he'll gladly sit there for 45 minutes to sometimes an hour just talking. And I don't think it's a coincidence in terms of how comfortable he is with the media that he might end up pursuing that career after he retires. But he really is someone who I really do think that the fans are going to appreciate. First of all, because he is such a humble guy. He is an open book, but also when he gets on the pitch, man, is he feisty. And for a club like Celtic, who wants to see, at the very least, their team give 100% effort, you are going to get that from Johnston, maybe even 110, 120% effort if that's possible.
Yeah, and you know, that profile that we're talking about there about him as a person has been something that the manager again spoke about coming in last year, doing what was, you know, dubbed as a rebuild. That it was important that he brought in players of quality, but character as well. It's a side so far, but just showing that they can tackle really any challenge. They were written off for the league last season. They overcame that tough challenge and went on to win it. And they continue to do that. You know, in the face of adversity, this team, this particular Celtic team under Ange, just seems to thrive it, and that's something that those qualities seem to go well, because, you know, Ange said that one of the big transfer debacles last January was over Rayleigh McGree, who's representing Australia at this World Cup, who moved to Middlesbrough rather than make the switch to Celtic. So we ended up with Matt O'Reilly, who wasn't too far off the Danish side for this World Cup. But the manager, you know, wanted to come out and speak about, you know, fitting players of the right profile, the right character, getting that attitude right first, but before moving for them. And Johnston just seems to be one of those guys, just with the way you're talking there, Peter, about him.
Yeah, he really is, I think, going to win over Postecoglou. He's going to win over his teammates. He's going to win over the fans, everybody, just for that reason alone. And, you know, again, that's not to say he's not going to be, and I use this term very respectfully, but aggressive on the pitch. Like, he will definitely bring that, but then he'll step off the pitch and you'll think to yourself, is that the same player? Like, it's almost like two personalities, a split personality between Alistair Johnston on the pitch and Alistair Johnston off the pitch in that regard. But I'm sure that, you know, Celtic fans will take it so long as he brings the aggressiveness on the pitch. Yeah,
absolutely. And if he's as friendly as you say, fan media praisers with him are going to be absolutely fine. Just in terms of, you know, the level, something people will look at. You know, I touched on the amount of players from MLS it's went to this World Cup. You know, a lot of people look at it and think Gareth Bale, you know, leaving Real Madrid, he's went over there as a kind of, people who think that's the last pay packet. That's why he's went to MLS. But from what I've watched of MLS football, and particularly with Celtic's former manager, Ronnie Dyler, went over there to New York City. I watched them quite often, watched them win the Cup last year. It's a good level of football, and there's some players really thriving at it, and you can see how good the level of football is with some of these guys at the World Cup.
Yeah, and I think crucially too, with MLS, they've started to lean and or rely more on youth players. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of Americans going over to Europe. That's why you're probably going to start to see more and more Canadians go. Tejan Buchanan came from MLS. He was drafted into MLS and then goes to Club Brugge, where he is now doing very well, and he's impressed a lot of people at the World Cup. And now he's apparently fetching somewhere around potential at least 20 million euro transfer fees to go to an even bigger club by the summer. So you can kind of see that the league is starting to embrace more youth, and then also they're filling in the gaps with these really technically gifted South American players, and I think that's adding to the quality, because then these younger players see what level they have to aspire to in terms of quality on the pitch, but then also culturally what it takes to be a, maybe not even a top level footballer, but just having that mentality of, hey, if I want to go to Europe or I want to go to the highest level, this is what I need to do. And Johnston's one of those players who I think, out of all the Canadian players who were still in MLS, he was probably the one who was most ready-made to go to a league like the Scottish Premiership, to the Netherlands, to Belgium, somewhere like that, where, you know, the level is high, the pace of play is high, the tactical acumen is there. Is it going to be the overall quality of the top 5 leagues? Maybe not, but it's still very solid leagues, and leagues that I think that personally, I think he would settle right into, just in terms of his overall quality.
Yeah, and with Buchanan, you know, that price tag, that's the kind of point that Celtic's wanting to get in at and stop, that he's not making that move to Bruges first, really excelling at you know, whether it be a World Cup or any other stage, and then making that even bigger move on if you get in before he gets to Club Bruges or whatever team before, you know, you're going to get your value for money and hopefully develop the player. And then, you know, as I say, you know, Celtic's player trading model, it's self-sustaining. If that's what they see further down the line, that it's Celtic that receive that big fee, they're not having to go and pay over the odds for a player. But it is interesting because, you know, Ronny Deila has progressed from New York City to Standard Liège in Belgium, as you say. It might not be the highest profile of the club, but still a decent level of club, which maybe sees that, you know, and in years to come, the MLS football will maybe be given that wee bit more higher regard, and that kind of youth players being in the team more often, maybe due to the system in the league, that there's no relegation, and towards the end, you start to see more players come into the team. They're given that chance to break through, and if they do make the breakthrough, they're then allowed to go on and play.
That's it. And I guess that would be the silver lining to no relegation, because everybody in North America is polarized by this topic. And yes, it's true, it does maybe not incentivize owners or clubs to maybe go for it, or to spend and really feel that pressure of, hey, we're, you know, finishing near the bottom of the table every single season. When are we going to start to see some sort of progress here? But then on the flip side, the clubs who maybe sell a few players and have to rebuild in a way, and then they want to rely on those youth players, the pressure's off. And sometimes they even exceed expectations, because once those young players are given a chance, they end up taking the opportunities and thriving with it. And very similar to Johnston's Montreal teammate in Ismail Kone, who hadn't played professionally till this season, still only 20 years old, but already has a handful of Canada caps. He's at this World Cup. He's appeared in both games so far and looks super, super poised for someone so inexperienced and so young. So there's the flip side of it.
In terms of the fee, it's been reported today around £3 million. What is your take on that? Because, you know, just in terms of other markets that Celtic have shopped in, that they've been in the J League for a number of players, as I've already mentioned. If the reported fee is around £3 million, do you think that's, certainly from Celtic's point of view, a good value for money deal? We've spoken about Buchanan there possibly going from Bruges elsewhere for $20 million. Johnston at £3 million probably seals a decent bit of business for Celtic in this part.
Yeah, I think it's a decent fee, considering I think he moved to Montreal for about a smidgen over $1 million US. So for him in a year to have the progress he has made, to become such a pillar of the national team, to go from $1 million to £3 million a year or so later, especially considering that Nashville's owed a sell on. I believe Johnston, based on reports, is getting a possible chunk of that fee as well. So I think, considering, that is a really good deal. And even in a couple of years, I know he'll be 26, 27 by that point, but, you know, if a club, say in France, wants to take a shot at him, you can still sell him for a very strong profit. And considering too, I believe Johnston, his contract technically expires next December, but there's that weird MLS quirk where there are option years that clubs can pick up. I had heard through the grapevine that they were maybe going to pick up the 2024 option. So I believe there were 2 years left on the deal technically. But regardless, still a very solid fee for, a fully fledged Canadian international who's playing at a World Cup, who is still got a lot of growth in his game as well, and who can still fetch you, pretty good sell on value.
Yeah, and that links in well with Celtic's self-sustaining model. It links to Josip Juranovic, who many people are believing, Johnston's coming in to be the potential replacement for. He came for $2.5 million for Legia Warsaw. He's still contracted to the club, I think, until 2025 or 26, but just after a World Cup, they're maybe thinking around the age of 27, this might just be the time to sell you, then reinvest the money and go again, and that's how it progresses. Just to kind of finish, Peter, we've spoken about his attacking qualities, we've spoken about him as a defender, his experience so far. Just in terms of the mix of everything, where do you really think people are going to look and think he's really excelling at? Is it going to be playing as that inverted fullback when he gets that chance at Celtic? Or is it going to be as a no-nonsense defender? Or is it going to be his attacking play getting forward?
I think just because he is so well-rounded, it might be as an inverted fullback, because you're going to see his defensive qualities. You're going to see his ability to play it short and play through pressure, but you're also going to see just how much vision he has with those long outlet passes if those opportunities happen to be on, because I know obviously sometimes Celtic come up against deep blocks. They might not be able to maybe play as vertically maybe as they want to, just in terms of those long passes. But certainly always like to play on the front foot, always like to get the ball forward as quickly as possible. So I think that would be the role that I think a lot of Celtic fans would see him and go, my God, he is a class player, and someone who could, I think make a real impact.
Yeah, we'll soon see. We'll be here covering this all along the way. Peter, thank you for giving us some of your time. I know how busy you probably are out in Qatar just now. You've still got one game to go against Morocco, and we wish you all the best for that. We might have you back on once this deal goes through, as we do expect it to. But to all our regular listeners, and Peter Galindo, thank you for joining us in this CeltsAreHere transfer special, and Alistair Johnston.
Thank you very much.